Chapter 7, Sophia. Adam. Abu quickly adapted to life in Alexandria. His former thieving ways had taught him to be self-reliant and resourceful. In short order, he had mastered the ins and outs of this bustling city, its various quarters, and the markets at the Emporium. I was able to entrust Abu with searching out and finding useful things for our new household. Abu was smart, a natural-born negotiator. I dispatched him to search out where to find medical instruments, medicines, and kit. Through his efforts, I was able to acquire a very handsome set of instruments, herbs, and salves. I set up shop on the main floor of our apartments near the Emporium district, on the way to the Hephaestion, the causeway leading to the harbor. I hung up my shingle. Abu combed the nearby places and brought in a string of patients with ailments ranging from skin and eye diseases to broken bones to complications with childbirth. I found it very challenging treating these conditions, as I was never a surgeon, nor a gynecologist, or an orthopedic surgeon. But I did the best that I could with what was at hand. The patients paid for my services, and if they couldn't pay in coin, they did in kind, with vegetables, meat, bread, or whatever their trade and circumstances allowed. Abu would take these bartered goods and hawk them at the Emporium for money or other things that we needed. Bit by bit, Abu and I were able to make a living at this. We accumulated sufficient wealth to take on a housekeeper, Melissa, who kept our apartments neat and tidy and was able to prepare our meals. We were settling in very nicely. One day, Abu came back home wearing what looked like a black, brown, and white fur collar coiled around his neck. I asked him why he found it necessary to wear a fur collar in the heat of the day. Instantly, the collar moved and unfolded itself into two curious ferrets, each sitting on Abu's shoulders. I let out a great laugh at this sight. The two ferrets, named Atlas and Calliope by Abu, jumped to the floor, tumbled about, chasing each other through the apartment, jumping from table to chair, scurrying to the kitchen. This prompted a scream from our housekeeper, who, issuing a string of curses, emerged from the kulina, chasing Atlas and Calliope with her broom, swatting at them, and never landing a blow. The ferrets thought this was great fun, and jumped onto chairs, onto tables and shelves, knocking over the contents in a whirlwind of activity. Finally, Abu whistled, and Atlas and Calliope immediately returned to him, jumped up onto his shoulders and into his tunic, and poked their heads out of his sleeves. "Kyrios," said Abu eagerly, "can I keep them? They're so smart and funny. I promise I will train them and teach them how to behave." I stood, arms folded, trying to suppress a smile, and I tried my best to take on an air of suitable gravitas. "It looks to me like you've got two partners in crime." But I used the frisky ferrets as leverage with Abu to extract a whole series of promises, of extra chores, and promises to take his studies seriously in exchange for permission to keep them. Melissa, our housekeeper, was not at all happy. rolling her eyes and shaking her head at me. But she became resigned to the fact that our little household had acquired 2 new members. They were actually quite adept at keeping the rodent population and the odd snake in check. A few weeks after we had settled in, I finally worked up the courage to take the Tribune's letter in fulfillment of my promise to deliver it to this lady called Sophia, who lived and worked at the museum. I called on Sophia at her apartments and was greeted at the door by a very severe and skeptical woman, whose name I learned was Camilla. I gathered she was Sophia's gatekeeper, so to speak. She was singularly unimpressed by my introduction. "State your business," she glowered. "Of course, madam. My name is Adamus Julius Aliquis. I am a physician. I am newly resident in the city, and I came up from the south. I promised an acquaintance that I would deliver something to the Lady Sophia." Camilla, ever the devoted protector, shook her head. "We have no need of physicians in this household. We need no secret remedies. We need no bloodletting. We need no one to study our bodily wastes. Begone now." And she attempted to shoo me off. I laughed. "Madam, please, you misunderstand me. I have not come here to offer my services, but rather to ask for Lady Sophia's help, and to deliver this from a friend." I handed her the sealed letter from the Tribune. Camilla seized the letter from my hands and looked at it for a long time. She looked up at me through furrowed eyebrows and a suspicious expression. "Oh, well then, I will see that the lady looks at this." She started to close the door. Gently inserting my foot, I stopped her from completely closing it. "Excuse me, Domina. Would it not be possible to have a brief few words with the lady? I have come a long way, and the Tribune who wrote this letter wanted to make sure that the Lady Sophia opened it. I made him a solemn promise. Come back tomorrow at midday." I did go back. This time Camilla ushered me into the presence of the Lady Sophia without saying a word. I was dazzled by Sophia's beauty. She was tall, slim, and an elegant figure. She was dressed in a sheer white linen peplous, a full-length garment pinned at the shoulder and bloused at the waist, falling in appealing folds to ankle length. Her long flaxen hair was bound with silver ribbons and gathered into an attractive bun at the back of her head. Her liquid eyes were ice blue, wide and bright, and set in an oval face with full vermilion lips and a delicate chin. She moved with grace and poise, appearing to float into the room, walking as if her feet barely touched the floor. She was unadorned by jewels and makeup, but exquisite nevertheless. I was quite smitten, so much so that I struggled to speak. Sophia nodded her head and extended her right hand in greeting. Not knowing what to do, I grasped her slender hand with mine and bowed deeply. "My lady, I've heard so much about you. Thank you for seeing me. I hear you are a physician, sir, and that you are in search of a position and references." "Yes, my lady." "But I do not know you. I have not heard of you. I do not know of your work, your studies, your writings. How can I introduce you when I know nothing about you?" "I understand, my lady. I can prove myself. First, I desire to gain entrance to the texts in the great library to study the masters of medicine. I now know much already of anatomy and diseases. I have started a practice here treating the poor and needy. What I do know may be of use to others who may wish to study the medical sciences. But tell me, good sir, where did you study? Who are your teachers? Do I know them? I decided to be honest about this, but yet reveal as little as possible. I would not think so, my lady. I am largely self-taught, and my teachers, although skilled and brilliant in their knowledge, are not yet known in this age and in this place. I see you bring greetings from one of my most loyal students, Lucius alias Caelius. Why, yes, my lady. Tell me truthfully, how does he fare? He is well, my lady, and is now a tribune posted to the fort at Aswan, where I met him. He was very generous to me. I carried his letter to you as a favor in return for his kindness to me. I can tell you, he thinks of you very fondly. Poor Lucius, said Sophia. He was an eager student and a good mind, but he was not able to separate physical love from love of knowledge and wisdom. I am sorry to say that I had to send him away, as I could never return his affections. He had difficulty understanding the vows I have taken to forsake physical love. But I do remember him fondly, but as a mentor to a student, not as a lover. He was not the first one I had to send away. I found this directness appealing. Your name, sir? Adamus Julius Aliquis, I said. A very unusual name. Your cognomen, Aliquis, literally means anyone. What a strange but fitting name for someone who professes to be an outstanding scholar from an unknown place, she said with a twinkle in her eye. So tell me, Adam, anyone, I am perplexed. Here you present yourself as a scholar, learned in the sciences of the human body and its mysteries, yet you have no references, no connection with others who can vouch for your talents. What am I to do with you? Yes, my lady. I know that I need to prove myself, and I am eager to do so. I can teach you what I know. I can answer questions. Ask me, test me, give me a task that I may prove what I know, and I would be most happy to pay you a fee for your trouble. I have no need of fees, good sir, as I have a generous stipend which comes from my position at the Museum. But I shall tell you what we shall do with you, Adam, anyone? She looked at me thoughtfully and continued, I will give you a written pass and a letter of introduction to get you into the great library and the Museum. There you will meet Didymus Chalciteris, the chief librarian. The letter of introduction will also get you into the Serapeum, where you will go to see Rufus, the director of the clinic at the temple. They will provide you with books that you need to learn. I am most indebted to you, my lady, I said as I bowed deeply. You may also find it useful to attend my lectures at the Museum on mathematics. We will meet here once a week, where we will discuss your progress. Then we shall see where you may be useful, Adam, anyone. I do not wish to intrude upon your time, my lady. Pray, let me at least give a donative, an honorarium in recognition of your generosity. No, although there will be no fee, I will call upon you to return a favor, to undertake some small task for me from time to time in the future. You will be bound to me in that way. What do you say? Agreed. With thanks, I said, bowing deeply. I will do my best to earn your approval and trust. And so I began to spend long days at the great library and the Museum. With the help of Raphael's sash, I found that I could decipher the ancient Greek and Latin writings there. Gradually, over time, I found I was able to understand and absorb these writings, and then became quite fluent in Greek and Latin. In time, I found I could speak and read it, even without the sash. I began to leave it at home and try my luck speaking without it. At first, those around me, Abu and our housekeeper Melissa, noticed my strange accent. They often corrected my mispronunciations, but I got better and better with it as time went on. I realized that while my medical knowledge was far beyond the current knowledge of this ancient age, I had left behind all access to my reference texts, electronic data, and modern digital sources of knowledge. I was now back in a world where the only means of storing knowledge and getting access to medical science was through the experiences of others, written down on papyrus scrolls from antiquity. I had no way of accessing modern diagnostic tools. Digitized X-rays, computerized tomography, magnetic resonance imagery, and positron emission tomography all lay far, far in the future. I had no access to anything as simple as a microscope. I was at the very beginning of medical science, in an age where scientific method had yet to be developed. And yet, here I was, at a central repository of scientific and medical knowledge in this strange new world. And I was in the very center of it. Armed with the pass given to me by Sophia, and accompanied by Abu, we went to the Great Library of Alexandria and were introduced to the head librarian, Didymus Chalcynteris. Didymus, whose last name literally means bronze guts, was an elderly Greek. He was a prolific scholar, and he looked every inch the part. He was advanced in age for these times, well over 60, not very tall, with a stooped posture like a stork, knobby knees, and skinny legs poking out below a discolored white tunic, which was replete with stains from his latest meal. He had a long, wide face and thick, lion-like mane of frizzled white hair rising from a lofty brow. His nose was long and crooked, his mouth small, with full lips, pouted as he strained at his work. He had a long white beard, quite unkempt, also stained yellow here and there. He was notoriously absent-minded, and when not writing with a stylus at a feverish pitch, he would often stop in the middle of a conversation when his mind was diverted elsewhere by a random thought. He often froze for minutes at a time with his finger pointed upwards while he finished this thought, and then turned to his papyrus, scribbling his notes, and then resuming the conversation without missing a beat. I asked him about accessing what medical texts were available in the library. "My boy," he responded in a gravelly voice, "it's all around you." Didymus assigned a freedman, Castor, to help me. I was escorted down a covered walk, flanked by vines of jasmine flowers, fragrant and sweet in the early morning, between graceful columns supporting a long arched roof. I followed Castor into an enormous, round, domed building. The central atrium was surrounded by floor upon floor of shelved papyruses, parchment and vellum scrolls, and codex of books between soaring columns, supporting a high domed ceiling, pierced by an oculus opening to the sky, through which poured a thick shaft of sunlight. On every floor, radiating out from the center like spokes in a wheel, were long tables. Scholars and scribes by the dozen were busy about their work, reading, copying, consulting, transcribing notes on tablets and scrolls with long styluses dipping eagerly into the inkpots. Other slaves and freedmen scurried around these tables, piling books besides the scholars, taking instructions, and bearing armfuls of scrolls from the stacks and returning armfuls back into the vast vaults of the library. Castor at last brought me to one of the long tables, next to the stone balustrade railing of the third floor, where I sat down, looking over the railing, down into the atrium bustling with activity below. I saw knots of bearded scholars gathered in the nooks and crannies, engaged in lively discussions, oblivious of anything else. They dictated and lectured, gesticulated with hands and arms to drive home their points. Groups of 2 or 3 robed scholars walked the corridors, round and round, carried away in deep discussions. I sat on the bench, hands on my knees, and looked up to Castor, who awaited my orders. "Castor, my friend, can we start with Hippocrates?" I inquired with a raised eyebrow. "Kyrios," Castor smiled broadly, and replied, hands folded as if in prayer, "I shall bring you the Hippocratic corpus. There you shall begin. I am at your service." He turned and left. At length he returned with an armful of scrolls and deposited them on the table beside me. I picked out one from the pile, unrolled it, and began my education in ancient Greek and Roman medicine. I quickly found that the Hippocratic corpus was written over the last 400 years, not only by Hippocrates himself, but many of his followers, students, and later physicians. I pored over the texts, slowly at first, but steadily getting used to the style of the written characters. I was surprised and delighted by what I learned. I began to make my own notes as I progressed through the texts. There was a sense of unreality about all of this. Here was the foundational document of all Western medicine, and here I was, 2,000 years before my own time, reading the originals. Unbelievable. I began to feel a real sense of wonder and reverence for this priceless knowledge. Reading the corpus taught me how the ancients classified and diagnosed symptoms and diseases. It was all based on careful observation in an age where there were not even rudimentary diagnostic tools or tests. The corpus rejected the practice of medicine as an extension of supernatural forces. It emphasized a natural approach, a comprehensive understanding of the patient's health, with harmony between nature and the patient. The corpus emphasized a kind of scientific discipline based in the then known natural sciences and setting out methods for diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. There were detailed notes and sketches on the study of human anatomy and of the nervous system. Here were the beginnings of evidence-based knowledge, with detailed case studies and observations of symptoms, health and prognosis of patients, and detailed guidelines and protocols on how to establish a diagnosis. There were teachings on medical ethics, as physicians were expected to be persons of high moral standards. This was essential to being a morally just physician. There were volumes on the law, on the honor of the physician, on the diseases of women, prognosis, proretics, on flesh, on regimen, on diseases, on epidemics. It was an admirable and prodigious body of work. That is not to say, however, that there wasn't a fair amount of nonsense suffused within the texts. For example, there was a lot written on the theories that many infectious diseases were caused by bad air, such as noxious smells from rotting matter. Many of the treatments prescribed were outright dangerous. Bleeding a patient with prescribed for many ailments, and of course this would only weaken the patient further. Some of the methods described fit into the category, "do not try this at home." But while some of those treatments, methods, and theories on the causes of diseases were nonsensical by modern standards, I came to appreciate that, on the whole, medicine in this age had a solid basis in observation and clinical experience. In the days and weeks and then months that followed, I progressed through other Greek texts on medicine, and I dived into the Latin works on Roman surgery. Roman medicine was divided into specializations. I moved on to an 8-volume Latin text, De Medicina, and learned about Roman treatment of diseases, diet, pharmacology, and surgery. The surgical texts would, in particular, be very helpful because there were detailed descriptions about the removal of things like arrowheads, stopping bleeding, preventing inflammation, suturing wounds, and the amputation of limbs, the diagnosis of internal diseases, and treatment of ailments like kidney stones. I also began to attend lectures at the library and the Serapeum Temple to learn how the ancient surgeons dissected the corpses of deceased slaves and animals. The Romans had established a system of hospitals called Valitudinarium, where slaves and soldiers were treated. I studied how surgeons of this age use surgical instruments, such as the spoon of Diocles used to remove arrowheads and other barbed objects, bone levers used to move broken or dislocated bones back to their proper places, spatula probes and scalpels, bone drills, bone forceps, surgical saws, and catheter tubes. Of course, there were very serious limitations. I knew, for instance, that the common practice of bleeding an ill or injured patient was downright dangerous, and that most surgery was restricted to observable and superficial parts of the body, because there was an almost complete absence of things like antibiotics and the kind of modern tools, infection controls, and supports necessary to do internal surgery. Nevertheless, even with these limitations, I was impressed with much of the state of ancient knowledge. I resolved, if I remained in this age, to improve upon them. I was very interested in the knowledge and the use of a large range of herbal and other medicines. With Abu accompanying me, I began to attend at the Temple of Serapeum, where there was a large healing sanctuary. Here physicians provided treatment to the public. I kept extensive notes, which I used to keep track of the knowledge I was accumulating and to record my own considerable knowledge from my own medical education and experience. 2 or 3 times a week, I would go to Sophia's apartment and would explain to her what I had learned. We often talked late into the night. She was very interested in my studies. I began to expand on the state of ancient knowledge, to include other theories on diseases and treatments from my own education and experience. Sophia took all of this in. She had a rapid grasp of complex theories. In order to disguise my knowledge and its modern sources, I would ask a series of questions. For example, is it possible that febrile diseases and infections may be caused by simple organisms so small that they could not be seen by the naked eye? What if human tissue was formed by the combination of millions and millions of self-contained and interdependent units or cells that came together to form the organ and then the entire being? We were often joined by Didymus and Rufus, who peppered me with questions on each of my hypotheses. I was soon asking these questions, complete with my own diagrams, in front of a small gathering of scholars, philosophers, and physicians who were invited by Sophia into her apartments. This turned into larger gatherings of students and scholars in the museum, and at the library in larger and larger lecture rooms. Abu was often present, paying attention to every detail, and becoming my able assistant and secretary, arranging my notes, carrying my props, and listening to the feedback from the audience. He was getting quite an education himself for one so young. He had gone from an almost illiterate backwater slave to a junior scholar, and we were becoming quite a team. Sophia, always quiet and gracious, came to many of these talks and asked questions to draw out more and more detail from me. Her eyes shone as I explained about how the nervous system worked, and how the body digested food, and how the ear captured sound, and how the eyes captured light. She had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, and a first-class mind. I could not help falling in love with her. One evening, after we had dined alone, we walked, escorted by several bodyguards supplied by the prefect, to the Panion, a temple built to Pan, a Greek god and protector of shepherds and herds. This temple was built on the top of a man-made hill in the shape of a pine cone. Sophia and I walked up the torchlit spiral staircase to the top of the artificial hill where the round temple stood. The Greeks believed that Pan, with the hindquarters, legs, and horns of a goat, and the torso and face of a man, was the god of wild places, shepherds and flocks, music, and a companion of nymphs. It was a magical, moonless evening, and the dark sky was spangled with countless twinkling stars of the Milky Way spilling across the arc of the heavens. Sophia and I stood behind the round temple, lit by charcoal braziers and olive oil lamps. In the courtyard, circles of young maidens danced to the quiet and lively music of a pan flute, holding hands, bowing and turning this way and that, dressed in pure white garments, flowing and swirling with their movements. We strolled over to the balustrade at the top of the slope, looking down towards the harbor. There, in the distance, was one of the great wonders of this ancient world, the Theros Lighthouse, which stood at the entrance of the great harbor. Standing at over 100 meters high, it towered above the dark waters and the other buildings in the city. At its very top, a pier of flames, amplified by mirrors, flickered and danced like a brilliant red dragon, guiding mariners from scores of kilometers away into the great harbor. The magic of the whole scene was enchanting. I felt like I was in another dream. Sophia's eyes were ever on the stars, looking first one way, then another, searching, her head tilted back, her long, slender neck extended. She began to speak to me, pointing out the objects of her attention. Adam and Ewan, your first love is for the human form, the body and all its wonders and ailments. This, she raised her arms with palms open to the heavens, is my first love, my passion, my obsession. When I was a boy, I said, my father and I would lie for hours in the warm grass behind our home, gazing at the stars, wondering and losing all sense of time. Tell me, my lady, what do you see, so that I may know you better? I see here tonight the four wanderers, the planets, which move in relation to the fixed stars beyond them. I see here Aphrodites, Ares, Zeus, and Cronus. She pointed out these planets in the skies above. What do you think makes these wanderers move so? I asked. That is not known to me, but I can tell you with the aid of my astrolabe the position of each of these wanderers on any given night. Yes, but why do you suppose they move like that? Well, Adam and Ewan, she smiled. More than 350 years ago, Plato suggested that the motions of the wanderers can be explained by combinations of uniform circular motions, where our Earth, where we stand, is a sphere. Eudoxus tells us in his book, On Speeds, that each of the wanderers, each planet, moves in a concentric sphere by arranging the axes of these spheres of movement, and by giving each wanderer a sphere, one can estimate the appearances of the other wanderers. And tell me about the stars. What about the stars? What do you think they are? I asked. Well, she said, looking at me thoughtfully, they are something that exists on or in an unimaginably large sphere of darkness that surrounds the inner circles of Helios, the sun, and the wanderers. It's all very mathematical, you see. It's all about spheres and axes and stationary spheres. Yes, I said. But what are the stars made of, do you think? Well, some philosophers say that they are fiery stones embedded in the furthest celestial sphere. Others say that they are pinpricks in the furthest sphere, and that sphere is surrounded by a further fiery sphere, so that we see the fire through the holes in that sphere. That sounds very complicated, I said. Aren't there simpler explanations? Well, it's only complicated until you sit down and do the mathematics, the moving geometry of the concentric spheres, and then it all makes sense. With my instruments, I can make predictions and calculate our position on the sphere as we walk here on the Earth. But what if, I began. By Hera, here comes another one of your questions. You know, Adam Anyone, that there are those amongst us who think you ask too many questions. She laughed. But I like the challenge. Go ahead. She rested her elbows on the balustrade, the open palms of her hand under her chin, looking at me with a gentle smile. Well, what if the earth itself were a wanderer, like Aphrodite's or Ares, Zeus, and Kronos? What if these wanderers were all traveling at different speeds in an oblong orbit around Sol, the sun? And what if Sol were part of a greater collection, a star, a ball of energy and heat, just like other stars you see? And what if those stars were part of a larger conglomeration, part of the Milky Way, the Galaxias Calicos that we see above us? What then? Adam Anyone, she giggled, standing straight up. Why, that would be an impossibility. I cannot imagine it. It would mean that all of our calculations, our concentric spheres, were all wrong. But how can that be? After all, I make observations about the pattern of these objects all the time. That confirms the theory of the spheres. Sophia looked down and shook her head. No, I cannot imagine what you proposed could possibly be the case. She then raised her eyes, twinkling in the starlight. You are a very strange man, Adam Anybody. Where do you really come from? Tell me. I told you. From Italia. My father was a soldier. He sent me away to learn my craft. Adam, I do not believe you. I have made inquiries. No one knows your family. You cannot name your teachers. You have no friends, other than the tribune who introduced you to me. And you have not known him for very long. You are obviously trained in medicine and physiology. There can be no doubt that you seem to know more about the healing arts than the most venerable physicians in the city. Rufus says so. But you seem to know so much more. Your mind is not here, but in the future somewhere. You know things that have not yet come to pass. And I have spoken to Abu, that rascal with the ferrets. My little shadow, what stories has he told you about me? No doubt you bribed him with some sweets to betray my secrets, I chuckled. He is in awe of you. But after a lot of probing on my part, he let slip that you brought 2 boatmen back to life after their throats had been cut by pirates. How can this be?" She sighed and continued, "And there is more. I have looked at your notes. You write in a strange hand, with an alphabet that is known to no one in this land, in a language that no one can confirm exists. So now the truth. Who are you, and where do you really come from?" "My lady, I will tell you in all truth." I paused, my head down, and continued, "I hardly know who I was. I know not how I was brought to this time and place. But I am a healer, and I will heal with all my skill. I do know that I've been brought here for a purpose, but I do not yet know what that purpose is. But I have somehow surrendered to it. Beyond this, do not press me, for I cannot tell you." Sophia, radiating supreme calmness and grace, took all this in and said nothing. We looked back to the star-speckled skies. Over the next several minutes, 7 or 8 silver streaks arced across the sky directly overhead. "What do you think those are?" I asked. Sophia did not take her eyes off the stars. "They are Betylia. The priests say they are post-amoras, a sign from the god that something momentous is about to happen." She smiled and looked back into my eyes. "But I think they are rocks that fall from the skies. We have a small collection of them in the museum. And, Adam Anyone, before you ask your next question, how they come to fall from the sky, I will answer you. We do not know." I could not resist. "My lady," I said, "would these rocks have fallen from the heavens because the earth exerts a force that pulls them towards us?" Sophia laughed. "But how can that be? What would cause this earth to exert such a force?" She paused for a time, and then a wide-eyed look transformed her face. I realized then that maybe I shouldn't press the point any further. Sophia was suspicious enough about me already. She shook her head. "Really, Adam Anyone, you ask such strange questions. They sometimes make us very uncomfortable. But I confess, I had never thought of such a thing." I changed the subject slightly. "Tell me, my lady, why do you think we are here? What is the meaning of all of this?" I said, gesturing up towards the bejeweled vault of the sky. "What is our place in all of this?" Sophia laughed softly. "I do not have all the answers for you, Adam Anybody. I think this is something that you must find for yourself." "But what do you believe in, my lady? Can you tell me, so that I may know you better?" Sophia moved over to a stone bench and sat down. She gestured for me to sit beside her. She gently grasped my hand. "I believe in knowledge. I believe in the intellect. I believe in the soul," she said as she raised her eyes to the heavens. "I believe that this all starts with the One. The One is the highest transcendent principle from which all the rest of reality emanates. The intellect is derived from the One. The intellect is the highest reality that human life can access. From the intellect is the organization of the material world. Under the intellect is the soul, which is the perfect image of the intellect. But tell me, my lady, what is the soul? It is the soul that regenerates the material world. The soul has one aspect that the intellect lacks. The soul is able to interact with the material world. The soul is therefore the mediator between the physical world and the intellect. But do you say that there is one soul to the universe? I asked. Sophia nodded slightly and smiled. The human soul is but a fragment of the greater soul. The human soul has forgotten its origins from the greater soul. The human soul dwells in our material bodies. But, I said, do you ever see the human soul uniting with the One? Yes, but not without suffering. The human soul must strive to develop higher level virtues. This will permit the human soul to remain unaffected by matter, and it will enable the soul to contemplate with the One and withdraw into its immaterial origins. And what do you say are the higher values that must be developed? I asked. We must start, I think, by defining our terms. First, what is virtue? I think a virtue is a habitual and firm disposition to do what is good. Virtue is a soul's true response to the One. She stood up and walked again to the balustrade, and leaning against it, looked towards the harbor. I see faith is a virtue. Faith is the promise of things hoped for, or things not seen. Having faith in the One leads to truth. Plato also tells us that there are cardinal virtues. These are wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice, she continued. Wisdom is the most essential of these virtues. It is the ability to make sensible decisions and judgments, drawing on our own personal knowledge and experience. It is the ability to recognize and choose between right and wrong. This is the virtue of a great ruler. She continued, courage or fortitude is the ability to confront fear, intimidation, danger, difficulty, and uncertainty. It is an ability to face a challenge without flinching. I think that although it is often thought of as a military virtue, I don't think it's just that. I say that it takes courage to speak truth to the powerful, for they may not wish to hear it. It takes courage to stand alone and defend one's values when those about you find them inconvenient. It takes courage for us to confront our untruths or our own failures. Moderation is the practice of self-restraint and self-control. This keeps us from becoming a slave to our passions and desires, which may otherwise possess us. Now, justice is the virtue which unifies the other three cardinal virtues. If one achieves the virtue of wisdom and has steadfastness, which is the fruit of courage, and practical restraint, self-denial, and self-control, we can become a just person. Justice can only prevail when the human soul is well ordered and begins the process of becoming united with the One. Only just people can make a just society. If the people lack wisdom or courage or moderation, they will lack justice. And I think the human soul yearns for a higher spiritual reality. It desires us to transcend into that higher spiritual reality. That is our real purpose in this world. We must always seek to transcend into what Plato has called the world of forms. This is humankind's highest purpose. And I think that subjects like mathematics and astronomy remind the soul of the world of forms. For mathematics is the language that helps us to discover and transcend ourselves to a higher purpose. Sophia turned and looked at me. And so I tell you, Adam anyone from nowhere, use mathematics, astronomy, and the natural sciences to find the meanings embedded in reality, and thus go beyond the material world. But I must also say to you that a human being and its material concerns are hurdles to overcome in order to achieve that unity with the One. But tell me, my lady, I said, what of love? What do you do when your students fall in love with you? I rebuke them, Adam anyone, for I am married to my work. Then you must make them miserable, I sighed, for how can they go on without you? They must be dazzled by your beauty and enchanted by your mind. I smiled. She looked at me very carefully and spoke softly. Then I say, they are on the wrong path. They will not ascend to the higher spiritual reality. Their minds will not be set on the kinds of rituals and discipline needed to purify the soul and approach union with the One, to ascend to the world of forms. And if they are so fixed on chasing after material sensations and possessing another person, then they have no place here, she pointed, or out there, gesturing grandly to the starry heavens. She looked back to me. I, for one, take a very dim view of my imperfect body. It is a good enough vessel for my soul at the present, but I seek a higher meaning, a higher plane. This is at the center of who I am. It is for this reason that I have taken a vow of chastity and do not delight in the possession of things. I came into this world with nothing and leave it with nothing. But what about love, my lady? Surely love is not just a sensation, a feeling, a product of the material world. Surely there must be space in this world, and in your higher form of existence, for two souls to unite so completely that they become one. This is something that I have studied before, Sophia nodded. The Hebrews have an ancient book they call the Torah. There is a story of creation, of man and a woman, and they say that the woman was made from the rib of the man, and that the man was called Adam, she smiled. She was brought to Adam, and he said, "This is now the bone of my bones, the flesh of my flesh." And then their sacred book says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall become one flesh." She was quiet for a moment and smiled again. "But I sense you know all this, don't you, Adam anybody?" I turned away. Sophia grabbed my wrist and turned me back towards her. "How strange you are. You know all these things, don't you?" She pulled me closer, her lips coming to within an inch of mine. How is it that you know? How is it that you ask all these strange questions? How is it that you write those strange letters and words unknown? Tell me, Adam anyone, for I must know. Reluctantly, I broke her hold, turned, and retreated a few steps away. I turned back towards her. Tell me, my lady, for wisdom is very deep within you. You speak of the One, the All-Knowing, the Creator. I tell you there was a time not long ago when I thought that this was not so. I believed that there was only one material world, only one material universe. I gestured upwards. This universe of things, of matters, physical, touchable, discernible to the senses. But now I am not so sure. So tell me, if you can, does the One you speak of have messengers, spirits, souls with intelligence that the One sends down to us? Sophia closed her eyes and thought for a long time. The Persians, she began, and many other peoples, many ages before them, spoke of winged messengers from the gods. The followers of Zoroaster believed in winged beings called Fravashi, whom the Greeks called angels, and that there was once a great battle between them, divided into the forces of light against the forces of evil. We Greeks have Hermes, the winged messenger of the gods, whom the Romans called Mercury. I do not know much about these beings you call angels, except that from ages and ages ago, humankind have known them. But why do you ask this, Adam anybody? Because, my lady, in my wanderings, I think I have met them. Sophia moved closer, touching me gently on the shoulder, drawing my eyes to hers. You are such an enigma to me, Adam anyone. I see you as a traveler, knowing much, but keeping secrets. What is it that you seek? I bowed my head. Completeness, my lady, I sighed, but I do not know where to find it, except that... Tell me, Adam, except what? Except that I have found a kind of completeness here, now, with you. You must know that I feel that way. And yet what? She said, caressing my cheek with the palm of her hand. And yet what? And yet I do not think that this is the end of my journey, but only the beginning. Sophia retreated quietly back and sat down on the stone bench. She then looked over the harbor in the distance, staring for a long time at the pyre burning at the top of the great lighthouse, Pharos, in the distance, casting a flickering red light over the harbor and the waters beyond. She looked back to me. Dear Adam, I do understand, for I also am on a journey that does not end here and now, and I have taken sacred vows to pursue it. I approached her and knelt, bowing my head, my forehead touching her knees. Most gentle and admirable lady, though I have far to go, I shall never forget this night. I pledge my body, my soul, and my mind to your service always, and I ask for nothing in return. She lifted my head with her hands and looked deeply into my eyes. I will keep you in my thoughts always, and I will call on you when in need. But now, on this gentle night, may we not rest in each other's company until destiny takes us where it will? In all the time that has passed since that magical evening, through all the ordeals that followed, my mind would go back to that night where I was first touched with that sense of completeness and saw that it was good. Music. Ed Records. Legends. AM Sound. When Dreams Come True. Andy Bird. Somewhere Far Away. Zach Nelson. Myth. Twins Music. Dandelion Field. Epic Sound. Trevor Kowalski. For What Is Right. Epic Sound. Dusty Enigma by Rand Aldo. Epic Sound, Sayuri Hayashi, Agnel. Epic Sound, Megan Wolford, Starlight Wonder. Ed Records, Save the World.